All right, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are a culture in crisis. I don't think that there's any question about that, and I could spend a lot of time defending that thesis, but I don't think that it's necessary. And so if you disagree with that, I'd probably just find another video to watch, because I'm going to begin on that premise, which I do believe is a fact that we could agree upon objectively, and I'll just stop there. So when I say that we're in crisis, I'm not talking about the ideas that have penetrated their way into Congress and into laws in the past. That's obvious. That has happened before. And although we have an imperfect system, our constitutional republic has generally done a decent job of righting the ship. If we get bad laws, then a majority gets the bad lawmakers out and a new lawmaker in, and then the laws change and we go back on the straight and normal path. So it's much worse than that. We are talking about ideological asymmetries. And so what I mean by that is these are fractures that are occurring in society that are so extreme that they actually cause your own ideology, the American ideology, your religious ideology, political ideology, whatever it is, they actually cause fractures, wholesale fractures in those ideologies. And I don't know another time in history when anything other than social collapse has caused that. That is the basis of ideological fracture. And now I think as we look out into our own culture, we can see the fractures, and we can see the termites and how frantically they are continuing to dig at those fractures and to agitate for a complete break for whatever reason. Their plans aren't entirely clear, but neither is their methodology or their reasoning, etc. So I think it's helpful to take a look at the very beginning, what may have crystallized in order to generate the conditions to cause us to end up where we're at. And I think we don't need to look any further than academia, as is so often the culprit. And specifically what I mean is the corruption of the PhD. So we have had the ethnograph or ethnography for over 100 years. Anthropologists have used it. And the basic premise, a thumbnail of an ethnography, would be that you're trying to offer a perspective, a cultural perspective on some larger cultural issue that is in the field of anthropology. So you have some biological ties there, some social ties. There's a matrix, and I'm not an anthropologist, so I can't speak to it, and that is my layman's understanding of it. So the ethnography was valuable for that reason, because when you want to look at different cultures and compare differences, etc., try to figure out why we are where we're at, etc., then the ethnography is a good tool. It's a qualitative tool. And so this, as opposed to the quantitative, where I might record information and then code it and try to crunch numbers and come up with a general conclusion based on something like that. Most PhDs will have some combination of the two, and it was around 1970 when we saw the ethnography become hijacked, I'm going to say. What happened was the ethnography was taken over by the social sciences and the humanities. So, in other words, it was exported from anthropology into these social behavioral topics that were starting to come up in the humanities. I like to refer to them as grievance studies. They're all some sort of complaint. Women's studies, gender studies, cultural studies for this group or that group, etc., critical this, critical that. What they have become is a form of Marxism indoctrination. And the reason a major reason that has occurred is because of the corruption of the PhD. Around 1970, this is when we saw the emergence of the auto-ethnography. The auto-ethnography, unlike the ethnography where I would go and I would collect information from people whose perspective was culturally similar in order to generate relevant results to the field of anthropology, instead of doing that, the auto-ethnography allows me to examine my own subjective individual perspective and then produce work and ideas in the form of a dissertation based on that, which is nothing. It might be something that could be of value as a component to a larger project, and in some cases I think the ethnography has been used in that way, and I think that's fine. But the problem with the auto-ethnography is it doesn't allow fair criticism, because if the person who's delivered the auto-ethnography and produced it into a PhD has given that to you and claims it to be genuine, then who are you to disagree with it? I can't invalidate a person's perspective. So if we're producing PhDs based on an individual perspective that can never be challenged and only be rubber stamp validated, then we have not improved the PhD. We have not expanded the circle to include more people who are intelligent and could make contributions. We've done the exact opposite. We've flooded it with unqualified people who aren't using rigorous academic methodology, and they are producing essentially subjective garbage, unfalsifiable, and many, many other things. And so I think perhaps the cure for some of our social ills might look like finding these dissertations that have been produced as auto-ethnographies exclusively and making sure that we somehow identify them as a separate category of PhD, because people who don't know this, people outside the academy, even employers, when they get someone's resume and the PhD is in there, all they're looking at are those three letters, because those three letters are imbued with a sense of academic integrity and honesty, and you don't have to question that. And it is the measure. It's the standard. If you have a PhD, you have made it. You have made a contribution to the field of science, and your colleagues have validated that, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're a doctor, and your idea is at the king of the hill until someone takes it off the throne, et cetera, et cetera. So that's not what the PhD is anymore. Most of the PhDs, people who are moving into the social sciences now, are either exclusively auto-ethnography or ethnography with auto-ethnography combinations, and there is nothing of any value to any of it outside of anthropology. It does have value there, but you'll notice that people on the left and people who are espousing these Marxist ideas have done a good job to, once they exported the ethnography from anthropology and turned it into the auto-ethnography, they immediately began to cut ties with anthropology. So no longer is there a biological basis for things. No longer can we connect the dots from cultural behaviors and attitudes to outcomes. We can't do that because everyone's subjective opinion is the other way, and who in the hell are you to disagree with it? And so they sort of win by default, but it's a game that's rigged. And the fact that no one has had the courage to point that out is what's disappointing. It isn't that no one has seen it. I think this is obvious to people who are in the institution, who have a sense of what's going on and have looked around and have not had their heads stuck up their own asses for the last 10 years. It's fairly obvious. Unfortunately, to people outside of the university, this is largely unknown. And I think this needs to become known. I think dissertations and PhDs need to be scrutinized, and we need to put an asterisk on those which have not used any scientific rigor and cannot be falsified and cannot be challenged, and just demand that they be rubber stamp validated with no other alternative. Those have to be put into a category that allows us to disregard them, because when those types flood the universities, that's when you have reached a maximum level of toxicity, because now you have people empowered by the validation of their own subjective opinion of the world, and this is the exact worst type of mentality that you want in the classroom indoctrinating your students. Someone who is so full of themselves that they are God in the little universe of that classroom. And you can talk to any students who have been subjected to this. It's very obvious. It's supported by the administration and the kooky ideas of politicians and linguists and people who like to twist words and ideas because they're going to gain some advantage out of it. And the whole thing needs to come to an end. And I believe that that starts with the examination of the basis of every dissertation that has been produced and our ability to discern the difference in the general public and to take the auto-ethnographies and to put them into the garbage pile where they belong. Once we get academic rigor back into the PhD and it can be a respected standard again, then we can begin to trust people who have earned them to teach the next generation of students. I think that's about enough for now. And so I will end this, and I'll catch you on the next video.